The knock came just before sunset, soft but desperate, the kind of sound that barely survives the wind yet somehow reaches the heart before the ears. It was the third knock that made her stop breathing. On a quiet street in a forgotten corner of the United States, where houses stood like tired witnesses to too many years of grief, a single knock on a door was about to reopen a wound that had never truly healed. By the time she reached the handle, her hands were already shaking, because something about that knock felt familiar in a way she could not explain. Before the story goes any further, if you believe in kindness, quests, and second chances, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us that even the smallest act of kindness can change a life forever. The woman's name was Margaret Collins, a Christian widow in her late 40s who had learned to live inside quiet. Her home was modest, clean, and carefully maintained, as if order could protect her from pain. Years earlier, laughter had lived in those walls, but time had stripped the house of sound. Margaret's greatest loss had not been her husband, though that grief was heavy, but her son, Daniel, who vanished 12 years ago on a scorching summer afternoon. He had gone out to ride his bike and never came back. No body was found. No answers were given. Only silence, endless and cruel. Since then, Margaret's life had narrowed into routines. Church on Sundays, volunteering twice a week, long evenings alone with scripture and memory. She left a glass of water by the window every night, a habit she never explained to anyone. It was the one thing she never forgot, even when grief made her forget herself. On that evening, when she opened the door, she saw a boy standing on her porch. He looked about 13, thin, sunburned, with dusty shoes and tired eyes that carried too much for his age. His clothes were worn but clean, and his posture was polite in a way that suggested he had learned survival early. He held an empty bottle in his hand, his lips dry, his face drawn by thirst and exhaustion. Margaret did not immediately understand why her knees weakened. Something about the boy's eyes stopped her heart, not because they were familiar in a literal sense, but because they carried the same quiet fear she remembered seeing in Daniel when he was small and afraid of the dark. It was the look of a child who had learned not to ask for much, because asking often led to disappointment. Margaret stepped back and let the boy inside without hesitation. She handed him water, watching as he drank slowly, carefully, as if afraid it might disappear. The sight of it alone broke something open inside her. As he finished, Margaret noticed a small scar on his wrist, the same place Daniel had one from falling off his bike years ago. Her breath caught, her vision blurred. The boy explained in fragments that he had been walking all day, moving from town to town, doing odd jobs, sleeping wherever he could. He did not complain. He did not ask for anything else. He simply thanked her for the water, his voice steady but fragile. That was when Margaret fell to her knees. She did not cry out. She did not scream. She collapsed under the weight of a realization she could not yet name. Her hands pressed against the floor as years of prayer, loss, and unanswered questions crashed together. The boy stepped back, confused and frightened, but Margaret lifted her head and looked at him through tears she had held back for over a decade. She did not know if this was her son. Logic told her it could not be. Time had passed. Faces change. Stories diverge. And yet her soul whispered something reason could not silence. Even if he was not Daniel, he was someone else's lost child. Someone else's unanswered prayer, standing right in her doorway. Margaret gathered herself and stood again. She offered the boy food, a shower, clean clothes. He accepted with quiet gratitude, never demanding, never assuming. As he sat at her table eating, Margaret watched him closely, noticing small habits. The way he folded his napkin, the way he paused before each bite as if thanking God silently. Daniel used to do that. Over the next hours, the boy shared more of his story. He had grown up moving between foster homes, shelters, and the streets. He remembered very little of his early childhood, only flashes of a woman singing hymns and the smell of fresh bread. Margaret's heart felt like it might burst. She had sung hymns every night. She baked bread every Saturday. Still, she said nothing. She did not want hope to become another wound. Instead, Margaret did what she had learned to do best. She gave kindness without conditions. She let the boy sleep in Daniel's old room, which she had never changed. The bed was still neatly made, the shelves still holding childhood books and toys untouched by time. When the boy saw the room, he froze, his face pale, his breathing uneven. Something stirred in him, too, though he could not explain it. The following days unfolded gently. Margaret helped the boy contact social services, enrolled him in school, and made sure he had what he needed. She prayed with him in the evenings, not pushing, not questioning, just sharing space. Slowly, the boy began to smile. Slowly, trust replaced survival. One afternoon, while sorting old photographs, Margaret showed him a picture of Daniel at age 10. The boy stared at it for a long time, his hands trembling, his eyes filling with tears he did not understand. Something inside him recognized something his mind could not. Records were requested. Tests were done. Weeks passed in agonizing patience. When the confirmation finally arrived, Margaret sat alone at the kitchen table holding the envelope, her hands shaking harder than they had the night of the knock. The boy was Daniel. Her son had been taken, trafficked, lost in a system that failed him. And now, by grace alone, he had found his way back home asking for nothing more than water. Margaret wept until her body ached. She wept for lost years, for unanswered prayers, for a God who had been silent but never absent. When Daniel learned the truth, he did not cry at first. He simply sat beside her, resting his head on her shoulder, as if some part of him had finally come home. Healing did not erase the past. There were scars, memories, and years that could never be returned. But love filled the spaces where despair once lived. Margaret learned that miracles do not always arrive with thunder. Sometimes they're not quietly, thirsty and tired, asking only for water. Near the end of this story, if it touched your heart or reminded you of someone you have lost or someone you still hope to find, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these stories of faith and compassion reach others who may need them. And before the story ends, please comment below if you believe a single act of kindness can sometimes answer prayers that have waited for years. Because sometimes, the door we open for a stranger becomes a doorway to a miracle we never stop praying for.